What's going on, guys? This is Joey. I'm coming at you another video for the week. So this week is going to be the last video for 2018. We have some good news and also some bad news, kind of just to wrap up the year in terms of what we've accomplished on this channel. Also, before I kind of start this week's update, if you guys haven't checked last week's video, I made a kind of a different video, a little bit more, relaxed, kind of funny video to enter into the King of DIY's contest. A chance to kind of hang out with him in Aquashella. So if you guys haven't seen that video, definitely check it out. Alright, so let's start off with the bad news. I actually had two bad news that I kind of have to go over with you guys just because it's a learning experience and I kind of like to share things that go on in the fish room. So for the first one, my 25-gallon cube tank that I've just kind of have with my zebra plecos and a couple other plecos, and it ended up having to split the discus pair, just because they were fighting. So the male is actually in that tank, the female is actually in the bigger tank. I just kind of like to separate them for a couple weeks and then reintroduce them together, see how they do. They always fight. They have maybe a couple weeks where they don't fight and they go back to fighting. So it's kind of just a weird relationships between them. So here's the weird thing. Pretty much one night, I'm just kind of checking out the tank and it's kind of close to the time where the lights would actually turn off. And this tank does run CO2, by the way. I'm looking at the tank and I noticed half of my plecos are upside down, literally flopped over. What the heck's going on? I'm looking at them and I'm seeing all of them are kind of gasping kind of for air. I've seen signs like this before. It's when a tank pretty much has too much CO2, pumped into the actual system. So the first thing I did was I quickly, put an air stone in there and turn off the CO2. So those were the first signs in terms of just there was way too much CO2 in that system. So here's the weird thing. The system has been, up and running for months and months. I don't really touch the dial in terms of the CO2 ever, right? The only time that maybe touch is if I am removing it to fill up the CO2. But I didn't refill, the CO2 recently or anything like that. So I went ahead and just, sanity checked the CO2 system. The dials were all the same in terms of where they were set. The only difference was the CO2 tank was actually low, where it's almost depleted to the point where it's about to need refill. So I don't know if maybe CO2 is pumped more or it fluctuates as the tank kind of gets down to its last leg of CO2 in the system. I'm not really sure, but pretty much what I did was shut off the CO2, put an air stone, a couple hours later the fish bounced right back. So that was very close to having a massive loss in that tank. Would have been the discus pair, would have been all my zebra plecos, all my other leopard frog plecos. It would have been really, really bad. So luckily I caught it. So pretty much I dialed back the CO2, refilled the CO2 tank, and everything looks like it's fine. So next time I'm probably gonna pay a little bit closer attention to the system when it kind of gets closer to the end of its life, just to see if it fluctuates again or it dumps a bunch of CO2 for no reason. I have no idea, but definitely going to pay attention a little bit closer to that system. Alright, so moving on to bad news number 2. So this one I actually ended up losing a fish, and sadly it was actually one of my ultimate angelfish. Quick summary on this, pretty much an ultimate angelfish jumped out of the tank, landed on the ground, and shriveled up before I actually could find that an ultimate was missing. So it was basically one day I was looking at the ultimate angelfish tank and I noticed that we were low in terms of I had 7 ultimate angelfish in this tank and I only have 5. I only see 5. I'm like, what the heck's going on? Obviously the first thing I looked was on the ground somewhere because I have an open tank, thinking fish jumps out of the tank all the time. And sadly that's actually what happened. One of the fish jumped out of the tank and actually landed in the back of the tank and literally died. So there was no way of saving that. That fish was dead for a long time back there. Probably a couple days. And the lucky thing was there was another ultimate angelfish that jumped, and that ultimate angelfish jumped because I have a tank to the right and to the left of it. It actually jumped into one of the other tank. And luckily that one jumped into that tank and actually survived. Now probably the one thing I'm going to say is, there's always risks of having open, container tanks or whatever. I knew the risk. The only thing is the angelfish probably was, fighting each other or doing something where they both got spooked and they both jumped. That's the only thing I can think of in terms of, why are they jumping? But yeah, I knew the risk. A lot of my tanks are open, open tanks. I get, fish that dies from time to time. Understand that. So definitely something that I can control, but I just like the way it looks in terms of just having it way open, you know. The tank does come with a glass top, but because I actually have an overflow box and just some other stuff in there, it doesn't fit completely over it. I can cut it. It's something I could probably look into, but I don't really have a cutter for glass. So maybe something, I might look into some just netting. I've done that in the past, but smaller fish can always jump out of the netting just because always a little bit bigger. So I knew the risk. It was just sad to see, you know, one of my Ultims actually jump out and die because of that. So those were kind of the bad news from the 2 weeks that you guys haven't seen an update. So let's move on to the good news. As you know, I've been working on breeding projects, especially just growing out plecos and trying to breed some of these unique and rare plecos. A lot of them I have are not breeding size. I got them really small. It takes, you know, at least 3 years of growing out just to get into that size. And you know, for the most part, I had a lot of these plecos probably for almost 2 to 2.5 years now. And some of those are kind of getting into the stage where they can actually be breeding. Now all the plecos are out in the garage, really haven't had any success. So one day I was out there feeding the tank as normal. You know, I was dropping in food and I noticed like a very small, like black, like pleco looking thing, like literally like that small, right? I'm just like, what the heck is that? Get closer, I noticed that they were pleco fries, like literally pleco fries everywhere on the bottom of the tank. And I was like, holy crap, you know, we got fry. We actually are breeding plecos now. In that specific setup, this is the L183 Starlight Plecos. And I noticed that, you know, I only put two caves in that tank and it's always occupied by males. I noticed that one of the males was fanning, like maybe for the last like week or so, just fanning away. It looked like it was kind of like a breeding fanning, right? And I didn't really think of anything, right? It's just because I haven't had success. I really haven't seen any females that were kind of big enough. So I was just like, whatever, right? Just like, that pleco's just kind of there, just waiting for a female to come in, right? But yeah, so it all clicked. It was just like, man, I've seen this pleco just fanning away for like almost a week long, and it's probably the same one, right? I see a bunch of fry in there, right? So I go ahead and just scoop all of them out, or as much as I could that day. And I noticed some of them were kind of stuck in the overflow box too, so I went ahead and picked those guys out, put them in the tank inside. The first night I got about like 10 or 11 of them, and I went ahead and put them into that smaller tank so they can kind of grow in that tank. There's algae in the tank, there's other smaller plecos in that tank, they'll grow in there. The next day I went back just to spot check to make sure that I didn't miss anything, and also because they're small and like that tank is huge, right? They could be anywhere. I found 5 more actually in that tank. I went ahead and threw those guys in there as well. And then the following day, same thing. I went ahead and spot checked just to make sure I missed anything, and I noticed I got a couple more. So I think I got like another like 4 or 5. Went ahead and added those into the tank. So I have approximately maybe close to 20 pleco fries in this tank, so I'm super excited. So obviously I have a confirmed pair in there somewhere. I know the father at least, but I don't know which one's the mom. But I'm super excited just to have some breeding action, just because, you know, I've been running this project for years and years and I haven't had any success, and finally right before the end of the year we have some success. So this is a great way to end 2018. Moving on to 2019, I'm hoping that we get some more breeding pairs. So yeah, I'm super excited. I hope you guys are also excited because, you know, things are finally paying off in terms of rolling. So for the first batch, most likely I'm gonna grow them out and probably end up selling at least half of them, and keeping the other half probably just for future breeding projects, for diversification, and just kind of picking out the best ones. All right guys, and that is the update for the week and probably the final video for 2018. If you guys are subscribed yet, make sure you guys are subscribed. And like always guys, until next time guys, peace.